They called Alpha King Silas Vane a god among wolves, but to his own daughter, he was a monster. For 4 years, he refused to enter the same room as the girl, claimed she smelled of graves and charcoal, claimed she was cursed, claimed she was an omen wrapped in the skin of a child. The pack believed him, the consort encouraged him, and little Elara was locked in a damp cellar and told to be grateful she was still breathing. Then a nameless maid named Lyra broke the castle's deadliest law. She touched the princess. She put her in a bath. And what washed off that little girl's skin was not dirt. It was not illness. It was not a curse. It was a lie, black as shadow, old as sin, painted onto a child by the one person her father trusted completely. The water turned to ink, and beneath it, a scent so pure, or so devastating, so undeniably royal, that every wolf in the castle dropped to their knees without knowing why. Silas Vane had spent 4 years hating his daughter. It took a powerless maid with a bar of soap to show him what he had almost destroyed. But what he didn't expect was what that maid would do to him. Not with power, not with magic, with the truth, and something far more dangerous than either. This is the story of the girl the world tried to throw away, and the maid who found a goddess beneath the grime. If you love stories about hidden power, dark conspiracies, and kings who are brought to their knees by the one person they never saw coming, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. Let's get into the story. The Iron Spire Fortress had no warmth, not in its walls, not in its halls, and certainly not in its king. Alpha Silas Vane stood at the head of the Great Hall, tall, broad, carved from cold authority, and watched his men part like water as a small figure was carried toward him. Elara, 4 years old, dark curls, eyes too big for her face. Silas felt the scent before she was close enough to see clearly. His jaw tightened, rot and charcoal, and something ancient and wrong that made his wolf recoil so violently he had to grip the arm of his throne to stay seated. "Take her back," he said quietly. The nursemaid froze. "Your Grace, it is her birthday." Lady Isolde thought perhaps. "I said take her back." Elara didn't cry. That was the thing that lived in the back of Silas's mind later, when the hall was empty and the fortress was quiet. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, patient and still as a child, who had learned that crying changed nothing. He told himself the scent made it impossible. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself a king could not afford sentiment. He did not tell himself the truth, which was that for one fraction of a second before the scent hit him, he had almost smiled. Later that night, Lyra moved through the servants' corridor with her mop and her bucket and her absolute determination to be invisible. She had been invisible her whole life. Broken wolf. No shift. No status. No value beyond the work her hands could do. She passed the cellar door and heard something that stopped her completely. Not crying. Something worse. Silence. The particular silence of a child who has given up on being heard. Lyra stood at that door for a long moment. Then she picked up her bucket and made a decision that would change everything. The cellar smelled of damp stone and neglect. Lyra held her lantern higher and found Elara in the corner, small and burning with fever, curled around herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. The rot scent was overwhelming, even to Lyra's damaged wolf senses, but beneath it, something else. Faint, almost imagined, like flowers growing under concrete. The "do not touch" signs were nailed to every surface, iron-lettered, Isolde's handwriting. Lyra had heard the stories. 3 servants dismissed without reference for accidentally brushing the princess's hand. 1 guard exiled for letting her pet his wolf during a shift. Lyra looked at the signs. Then she looked at the child. The child was burning up. She crossed the room, knelt down, and pressed her hand to Elara's forehead. The little girl's eyes flew open. Fear first, automatic and heartbreaking. Then confusion. Then something so painfully vulnerable, Lyra had to breathe through it. "Are you real?" Elara whispered. "Yes," Lyra said. "I'm very real, and you're very sick. Can you walk?" Elara shook her head. Lyra picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. That fact, the weightlessness of a 4-year-old who should have been round and sturdy and well-fed, settled into Lyra's chest like iron. She carried her to the servant's bath, small and plain and far from the king's wing. She ran the water warm. She found soap, plain and unscented, the kind they used for laundry, and she began to wash the princess of the Iron Spire fortress with the same gentle hands she used for nothing in her life, because nothing in her life had ever mattered enough to be gentle with. Until now, the water began to change color almost immediately, not gray the way bathwater normally did, black, ink black. And the smell. Lyra's hands stilled. The smell was changing. The water was the color of midnight and getting darker. Lyra kept washing. Her hands moved automatically while her mind raced. The black was not coming from dirt. It had texture, oily and dense, she clinging to the washcloth in layers like paint, being stripped from a surface that had been coated many times over many years. Shadow wax. She didn't know the name yet. She only knew that whatever was coming off this child's skin was not natural and had not arrived there by accident. With each layer that dissolved, the scent changed. The rot faded, slowly, then faster, like fog burning off in morning sun. And replacing it came something Lyra had no words for, clean and electric and ancient, like lightning had struck a field of flowers, and somehow both things survived. Star lilies and summer storms. Elara's true scent. The moment the last of the shadow wax dissolved into the black water, every wolf in the Iron Spire fortress howled. Not a warning howl, not an alarm, something deeper, involuntary. Like a pack-wide recognition had fired through every wolf spirit, simultaneously demanding acknowledgement of something sacred in their midst. Elara looked up at Lyra with wide silver eyes, silver, not dark as everyone had described, and said nothing. She simply glowed, faint and unmistakable, like moonlight lived just beneath her skin. Lyra sat back on her heels, heart hammering. Then the door exploded inward. Silas Vane filled the doorframe, sword drawn, eyes black with alpha fury. Every line of his enormous body coiled to destroy whatever threat had triggered a pack-wide response in his fortress. He found a maid, on her knees beside his daughter. He opened his mouth to give an order that could not be taken back. And Elara's scent hit him like a wall. Star lilies, lightning. His own bloodline singing back at him across 4 years of silence. The sword lowered, 1 inch, then another. Silas Vane, feared by every wolf on the Great Plains, stood in a servant's bathroom doorway and could not speak. His daughter looked at him and smiled. For the first time in her life, she smiled at her father. He should have arrested the maid immediately. Every protocol demanded it. She had broken the most ironclad law in the fortress, touched the cursed princess, interfered with the consort's explicit medical decree. Instead, Silas stood in the doorway and could not move. The scent was destroying him. Not the way the rot had destroyed him. Not with revulsion and recoil. This was different. This was his wolf recognizing something it should have recognized 4 years ago in a delivery room while he stood outside the door and told himself kings did not wait for children. His daughter, his blood, his failure. Elara was watching him with those silver eyes. His mother's eyes, he realized with a shock that moved through him like cold water. And she wasn't afraid of him. She should have been afraid of him. Everyone was afraid of him. "You!" he said to the maid. His voice came out wrong, too rough. "What is your name?" The girl on the floor, young, slight, dark hair falling loose from its pins, raised her chin with considerably more composure than anyone had shown him in years. "Lyra," she said. "I am a cleaning maid, your grace. 3rd corridor, Sir East Wing." You broke the decree. Yes. You are aware of the punishment. Something moved through her dark eyes. Not fear exactly. Something steadier than fear. She had a fever, Lyra said simply. She was burning up alone in the dark. I am aware of the punishment. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter. Elara had reached out and wrapped her small fingers around Lyra's wrist, holding on with the particular grip of a child who has found something safe and is not letting go. Something cracked open in Silas's chest. He stepped into the room. His hand closed around Lyra's wrist to pull her to her feet, and the mate bond hit him like lightning through stone. He released her immediately, stepped back. His face went perfectly controlled in the way of a man who has spent decades hiding what moves inside him. But his hand shook. Lyra looked at him, then at his hand, then back at his face. She said nothing, but she had seen. Lady Isolde arrived within the hour. She swept into the bathing room in ivory silk and cold fury, beautiful and practiced, and absolutely certain she could control this situation the way she had controlled every situation for 4 years. She took one look at Elara's silver eyes and the black water in the tub and made her first mistake. She went straight to the offense. The maid has poisoned her, Isolde announced. Her voice carried perfectly, designed for an audience. Whatever she put in that water has altered the child's appearance. I want her detained immediately. Silas said nothing. That was new. Isolde's eyes flickered. Silas, the maid broke the decree. She could have. What is shadow wax? The room went very quiet. Lyra watched Isolde's face from her position against the wall, watched the microsecond of something real move through those perfect features before the mask slammed back into place. I don't know what that. The residue in this water. Silas's voice was absolutely flat. I have seen it once before, in my father's war records. It is a high alchemy compound used to suppress and mask wolf spirit signatures. He paused. It takes repeated application to maintain, over years. Isolde said nothing. My daughter has been in your medical care for 4 years, Silas continued. You have been the only person with unsupervised access to her. Another pause. Longer this time. And you have just told me a cleaning maid with no alchemy training managed to introduce a complex magical compound into bathwater in the 30 minutes she was alone with her. The silence stretched. Isolde's mask was perfect, but her hands had gone very still in the particular way of someone choosing not to reach for something they suddenly need. Silas turned to Lyra, and for the first time he looked at her, really looked, not as an intruder or a violation of protocol, but as a person. Are you hurt? He asked. Lyra blinked. Nobody had asked her that before. No, Your Grace, she said quietly. He nodded once. Then he turned back to Isolde. Get out of my fortress, he said. Isolde did not go quietly. By midnight, the Hollow Guards had activated. Soldiers bound to Isolde's alchemical command, rather than the king's authority, their eyes blank and silver-glazed, moving through the fortress corridors with mechanical precision. There were 40 of them. Silas had 8 men he trusted completely, and a maid who couldn't shift. We cannot hold the fortress tonight, his captain said grimly. Silas looked at Elara, asleep against Lyra's shoulder in the corner of the war room, one small fist curled in the maid's dark hair. He looked at Lyra. She was already looking at him. Not for instruction, not for rescue. Calculating, her dark eyes moving across the room's exits the way a person moves who has survived by reading situations faster than others. The dead woods, she said quietly. Every man in the room went still. Nothing Isolde controls will follow into the dead woods, Lyra continued. The Hollow Guards are alchemically bound. The binding dissolves in corrupted territory. Nothing lives in the dead woods, his captain said. We will, Lyra said simply. Silas made the decision in 2 seconds. They ran. The forest swallowed them within the hour. Ancient trees with silver-black bark, air so cold it crystallized on contact, ground that made no sound underfoot because nothing grew beneath it. Silas stayed close to Lyra and Elara, closer than necessary. He told himself it was tactical. An hour in, Elara finally slept properly, exhausted and warm despite the cold, wrapped in Silas's cloak, which he had placed around both of them without thinking. Lyra looked up and found him watching her. "Why did you do it?" he asked quietly. "So you knew the punishment. You had no reason to protect her." Lyra was quiet for a moment. "She was a child alone in the dark," she said finally. "That was reason enough." Silas looked at her for a long time. Then he looked away, but he did not move further. If anything, he moved closer. The silver blade came from nowhere. One of his oldest human assassins, not bound by the alchemical restriction, had followed them into the dead woods and was good enough at his work that he got past two of Silas's guards before anyone reacted. The blade caught Silas across the ribs. Silver-edged. He went down hard. Lyra killed the assassin with a rock and considerably more ferocity than anyone expected from a maid with a broken wolf spirit. Then she was on her knees beside Silas, hands pressing against the wound while her mind catalogued the situation with brutal clarity. Silver poisoning, no healer, dead woods. Elara pressed against the far tree, watching with huge silver eyes. Silas grabbed her wrist. His grip was weakening already. She could feel it. "Leave it," he said. His voice was still trying for command, and mostly achieving it despite everything. "Take Elara and—" "Stop talking," Lyra said. "That is your king speaking. Your king is bleeding on dead ground and needs to be quiet so I can think." A pause. "You are extraordinary," Silas said, like it surprised him, like the word had come out before he could stop it. Lyra's hands stilled for just a moment. Then she pressed harder on the wound and opened every door inside herself she had spent her life keeping shut. Her broken wolf spirit was not broken. It was different, not a fighter, not a shifter, something rarer and stranger, a stellar guide, her mother had called it, once before she died. A spirit built not for combat but for navigation, for finding what is hidden, for singing lost things home. She had never used it. She used it now. Silver light, not aggressive, not burning, but searching, moved from her hands into the wound and began pulling the poison outward like a splinter from deep tissue. Silas made no sound, but his free hand found hers, and held on. When it was over, he looked at her with new eyes. Not the eyes of a king assessing a servant. Something rawer than that. See, something that had no political language for what it was. They found them at dawn. 6 of Isolde's best assassins, human and wolf combined. The restriction lifted now that the Hollow Guards had been recalled for the coronation. They came through the trees quietly and surrounded the clearing with the professional efficiency of people who did not expect resistance. They had not accounted for what Elara would do. She had been watching Silas bleed all night. She had been watching Lyra hold his hand and pour light into his wound. She had been 4 years old and alone in the dark, and she had learned that the world was cruel, and nobody came, and nothing changed. And then Lyra came. And then her father looked at her with different eyes, and she was not going back to the cellar. The lead assassin reached for Lyra. Elara stepped between them, small, silver-eyed, still wearing Silas's cloak that dragged 3 feet behind her. "Don't touch her," Elara said. Her voice was 4 years old. What came out of her chest was not. The moon phoenix rose without warning. Not a shift the way wolves shifted, but an eruption. Silver gold fire detonating outward from a child's body in a wave that moved through every assassin in the clearing simultaneously. Not killing, cleansing. The alchemical binding on the hollow guards within range dissolved instantly. 3 assassins simply sat down in the dirt, looking confused about where they were and why they had a sword. The others ran. Elara stood in the center of the clearing, small and blazing, and absolutely certain of herself, for the first time in her life. Silas was on his feet, despite everything. He crossed the clearing in 4 steps and gathered his daughter into his arms. She held on with both hands. He held on harder. Lyra stood at the edge of the clearing and let them have the moment. Then Silas looked at her over Elara's head and extended his hand. Not an order, an asking. Lyra crossed the clearing and took it. The 3 of them stood in the dead woods as dawn broke silver through the trees. And for the first time, they felt like something that had a name. They arrived at the blood moon ceremony exactly on time, which was to say, Isolde had just placed the false crown on her own head when the great doors opened and the king walked in alive with his daughter on his hip and a maid at his side, whose eyes had stopped being invisible sometime in the last 12 hours and started being something else entirely. The hall went perfectly silent. Isolde's composure was extraordinary. Lyra gave her that. "Silas," she said warmly, "you're alive. We were so worried." "Lyra," Silas said, without looking away from Isolde. "Yes," Lyra said. "Tell them what you found in the bathwater." So Lyra told them. She was not a performer. She was not political. She stood in the center of the great hall in a servant's dress, with dried silver light still faintly visible on her hands, and she told the assembled pack exactly what shadow wax was, what it did, how long it had been applied, and what it had been hiding. She set the residue evidence on the council table. She named every servant Isolde had exiled to keep the secret. She did it quietly and completely and without drama, because the truth was dramatic enough on its own. By the time she finished, the council was already moving. Isolde was stripped of her title, her name, and her alchemical license in under 10 minutes. The pack was efficient when the evidence was irrefutable. She was escorted out without silk, without ceremony, without the audience she had spent 4 years building everything to obtain. Elara watched her go from her father's arms. Then she looked at Lyra. "Is she gone?" she asked. "She's gone," Lyra said. Elara nodded seriously. Then she reached down and took Lyra's hand. The council elder stepped forward. The true crown, silver and ancient and kept in the fortress vault since Silas's mother's reign, was brought forward. It was placed on Elara's head. She wore it like she had always known it was coming. After the ceremony, when the hall had filled with the complicated noise of a pack recalibrating everything it thought it knew, Silas found Lyra near the door. She was already calculating her exit. He could see it. Old habits from a lifetime of invisibility. "You are not leaving," he said. "I am a cleaning maid, your grace," she said carefully. "I have no—" "You are the king's true mate," he said quietly. "My wolf has known since the bathroom. I have known since the dead woods." He paused. "I am sorry it took me so long to say it out loud." Lyra looked at him for a long moment. Outside the hall, Elara's laughter broke through the noise, bright and completely unself-conscious, the laugh of a child who has just discovered she is allowed to be loud. Something in Lyra's chest came all the way open. "You have a lot to answer for," she said to Silas. 4 years of that child in a cellar. That does not disappear because you figured out the truth." "No," he agreed, "it doesn't. I will not be invisible in my own life anymore. I know. And if you ever give me an order the way you gave her orders, Lyra," his voice was very quiet, "I am not asking you to serve me." He looked at her steadily. "I am asking you to stand beside me. There is a difference. I understand the difference now." The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and gold and patient. Lyra looked at the man who had spent 4 years being a nightmare, and 12 hours becoming something she had no safe word for yet. Then she looked at the little girl in the silver crown, laughing in the center of the great hall, like the world had just become somewhere worth living. She thought about cellars and silence and children who stop crying because crying changes nothing. She thought about black water and star lilies And a sword she killed a man with, because some things are worth more than safety. She took a breath. Slowly, she said. On my terms. Silas nodded once. No argument. No conditions. Just, yes. Elara came running back, crown slightly tilted, eyes blazing silver, both arms outstretched. She hit them both simultaneously. Silas caught her with one arm. His other hand found Lyra's. And the Iron Spire fortress, cold and graceless and built for war, felt for the first time like it might become something else. Something warmer. Something that deserved the people now standing in its hall. If this story moved you, if you have ever been invisible in a room that should have seen you, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. The next story is already coming, and I promise you, it is even darker, even deeper, and the queen who rises will make Lyra look like a warm-up. Do not miss it.